Hello and welcome, my young people. I am here coming at you live today to speak to you about the essay that you wrote. This one right over here. I think it is certainly a very interesting one, and it is really good. But I also think that there are some steps we can take to make this essay even better. Definitely a lot of room for improvement. We'll go one step at a time, and since it's easier to break everything down, to do so, I want to utilize a rubric that I have right over here. This right here is the rubric. Um, and I found this rubric from a book by Jeff Zwers. Um, and I believe that this rubric will help us do a deep dive on your text. This rubric uses a 1 to 4 scale, and it also works as a checklist to help you map out your future essays so you can further develop your skills. So let us begin. Okay, so the first thing on the rubric asks for a title, and your text does not really have a title. Um, but I don't fault you for it, since you probably assumed that because this was an essay for my class, you wouldn't need a title. But titles are good for getting the reader's attention and giving them a sense of what the text is about ahead of time without diving straight into the text. Titles are also good for organizing when you have a pile of text, of course. Because there is no title, I won't give a score, but just try to come up with a title next time. Okay, so now looking back at the rubric, moving on to the second piece on the checklist, right? We have the introduction section. The first part is asking for a hook, right? And your hook is certainly an attention grabber. The hook is your first sentence, and while we definitely want to grab the reader's attention with our hook, I feel as though starting with the word Yanks might catch some people off guard. And we will talk later about how it is kind of subjective and unprofessional to use the word Yanks. I don't personally take offense to it, of course, but some people might take offense in the way that it comes across as aggressive here just a little bit. Your hook should also lead into the main idea, which is not fully explored in your introduction, which is why I'll be giving this part of the score a 2 for now, which means approaching standard. Right? I think a better angle for your hook might be to draw on the sympathy that people have for oppressed people like immigrants, rather than beginning with the hatred some people feel towards them. That and it would align a bit more with the message you are trying to convey in this essay. Anyways, the next part of the rubric talks about background sentences in your introduction. You definitely have a grasp of this of setting the stage here, right? With another thing is immigrants that graduated from high school are working in fields or restaurants because they thought this country will be the house for many immigrants, but they're working to support their families in the country. This touches upon some of the issues that immigrants face, which is fleshed out a lot more in your essay, which is good. It's one of the major issues that face a lot of undocumented people today, which is that they are often sort of pushed to take quote unquote less attractive jobs. However, I think you can definitely expand upon this a little bit more within your intro to talk a bit more about maybe how widespread this issue is, or maybe how it has impacted your life so that people can really feel like the weight and gravity of what you're saying here, because it's a very powerful sort of like a piece of background information for your intro. Because of this reason, I'm going to give you a score of 3 on this section. All right, now the previous two sections here, parts of the rubric, are meant as a sort of segue into this part right here, which is your thesis. Your thesis is essentially your stance on the issue, which is the main idea of any argumentative essay. Your first paragraph, your introductory paragraph, does not really have sort of like a thesis, but the second paragraph definitely does. Yeah, your intro here talks about your desires and even includes a call to action right here. Right here in the second sentence, we can push the government by making protests or sending letters to the White House. This is a call to action. This is something that you want your readers to do. I think it's good to include that in your introduction if you're going to flesh this idea out and justify it, which you do throughout the essay. I think holistically, if we change up this hook, flesh out the background a little bit more and fix some of the grammar, and of course fuse these two paragraphs, I think we have a very solid introductory paragraph. We'll go into the grammar a little bit more later. Anyways, the next major section of the rubric here is the reasons and evidence section. I think the evidence you use throughout this essay is pretty varied. You talk about sort of worker exploitation. Hold on, let me pull this up so you can get a much better view. All right. So you talk about like worker exploitation, like places like here, like in the last paragraph. And you talk about how in the second paragraph, or rather this one right here, the government isn't really doing anything to stop it from happening. In fact, in the last paragraph, you know, as I pointed out over here, you mention sorry about that. Throat's a little bit dry. Anyways, you also mention how people will exploit this fact to threaten their employees to keep the cycle of exploitation. You also reference how immigrants have a hard time. Immigrants have a hard time obtaining higher education, right? So over here you reference this point. Over here you reference the story of someone named Domingo who faced this very issue. And you know, we don't really know who Domingo is, but I know that this sort of reality that he has faced, where he can't go to university because he's lacking documents, I know firsthand that it is a reality for a lot of undocumented Americans in this country. So I know this is a very powerful point to bring up. So your use of evidence shows that you know how to utilize a lot of reasons to make your point. So for this reason, I'm going to give you a score of 4 for this section right here on the rubric. So excellent job. Now for this part of the rubric right here, you didn't really use a lot of primary sources, right? Throughout your essay, you really didn't use a lot of primary sources. You did use the anecdote sort of with Domingo, right? Which is a good anecdote, but that's about it. I feel like your evidence is good and based in reality, but it could help to flesh out all of these points by including sources. Sources help the reader know exactly where you are gathering your information. I believe all of the claims that you make, and can attest that as someone who comes from a mixed status household, I know that this is a harsh reality for a lot of people, all of the stuff that you mention, but there is so much evidence available to you to pull from, that it may be beneficial to pull from scholarly sources and articles and such. For this reason, I'm going to give you a score of 2, right? Now let's take a look at the next part of the rubric, right? And it touches upon something that I think you did very interestingly within your paper. This part of the rubric right here is about opposing arguments. You definitely pointed out what people who are anti sort of immigrant think here, right? If we take a look at the second to last paragraph over here, you write, immigrants cannot go to university because we don't sort of have documents, or most of the time the government thinks we are lazies, or we bring bad things like drugs, for example, cocaine, right? This, I would say, is a good example of a steel man argument, as these are some of the concerns that people legitimately believe, and these are things that people in high positions of government actually say, right? So you are getting the direct sort of arguments and beliefs that people have, and you are explicitly writing them over here within your essay, right? The idea that sort of immigrants are coming in with drugs illegally, that immigrants are lazy, is a very widespread idea, unfortunately so, right? This idea, right? It should not be widespread. This talking point spread a lot in the media. It's, spread a lot within a certain high-ranking official. I think we all know who we're talking about. And it is important to sort of track exactly what the opposition to your point believes, and you did a good job with this part of the paragraph. However, that being said, we definitely need to expand on this point, because if we look back on the rubric, it says respectfully presents main counter arguments and opposing views, which you definitely did, but what you did not do is describe the weaknesses of opposing evidence. You did not really do that here, and I think it's a very missed opportunity. The truth is that facts are on our side. In these cases, immigrants without residency still have to pay taxes, and many of them do. Statistics show that immigrants in general commit less crimes, usually out of fear of deportation. And the note on drugs, right? Let's take a look back here. The note on drugs. Statistics also show that most illegal drug smuggling occurs at legal points of entry. So it's being committed by people entering and exiting the country legally. That's what the statistics actually show us, right? Because of the lack of pushback on opposing views, right, here in this essay, I'm marking this section as a 2, right? So here you're going to receive a score of 2. Facts are very much on your side, and I think it would be very powerful for you, for your paper, to include relevant statistics to debunk a lot of these claims, because they do exist. You just have to seek them out and incorporate them within your text, and it would be a very powerful moment if you can combat these sort of negative stereotypes and claims that are so widespread in today's media. Okay, but anyways, now we will move on to the conclusion part of the rubric. This part right here. Okay, we'll be looking close at the very last paragraph, as it essentially serves as your conclusion. All right, so let's take a look over here. This right here, the last paragraph. Here you introduce new information on exactly how, like, the manner of which undocumented people are exploited. It does tie back to ideas that you've shown in other paragraphs, right? So you've mentioned in places like here where over here, when does the government will give money to go to university or give chances to university and work at the same time, right? Until now, the government cannot do something for immigrants. An employer continue exploiting the workers or student workers, right? So these are ideas that you've touched upon earlier in your essay. And your conclusion does tie back to this, but you are again introducing new information. Um, so because of the introduction of new information, this should be sort of like this idea that um, like workers, right, immigrants are going to be exploited by their employers, and their employers are going to threaten to call ICE. Um, that is an idea that should have been fleshed out in its own paragraph, I believe. And so because of this, I'm going to be giving it this section, right, summarizes the argument, a score of 2, because you are introducing new information. I believe that you should have fleshed it out a bit more, the new information that you brought up, into its own paragraph. And you should have instead had more sentences that like just summarized everything and tied everything together at the end. The second aspect of the rubric in the conclusion section talks about connecting ideas. I think you do a good job at ending with a call to action, right? So the last sentence, to decide what to do to help us to protest for equalities in immigrant workers or students. I believe you're making a call to action to the government that they have a decision to make, that they have to decide if they're going to support undocumented workers and students, and you believe that they should, right? So this is a very powerful call to action. I think you did a good job at ending with this. You're essentially saying here that the government has this choice that they have to make. But I feel like this idea and the other ideas can be better tied together and summarized in the conclusion. So because of this, this section is also going to receive a score of 2. But yeah, next up we have organization, right? This is the next part of the rubric, the organization part of the rubric. Your organization of information is actually pretty good. Your essay does follow a logical order where you start with a hook, right? And I have some comments about a hook, about the way that you have structured your hook, right? But it is still definitely, like, I can identify this as a hook, right? You're trying to grab your reader's attention, and then, your thesis is not in your first paragraph, but it's still, like, preceding this part. And so, after that, you have your body paragraphs, your main body paragraphs. You have your opposing viewpoint right here towards the bottom. Then you have your conclusion. So there's definitely a logical order that you're following. However, this flow can certainly be improved with transitions and ideas, because every time you introduce a new idea, it's a little bit choppy. So for this reason, I'm going to give you a score of 2, and I think this particularly can be remedied in a number of ways, and it will get better the more you immerse yourself into the English language. I think in the short term, a good resource might be a sheet with examples of transitional phrases. So I have one right here. Right here's just like a little sheet of some transitional words and phrases that you can use. So when you're gonna add a point, you can add words like this, like also, furthermore, right? Comparison, if you're contrasting, if you have a cause and effect, or even when you're introducing your conclusion, right? So you have all sorts of words that you can use here in this sheet. This is just one example that I found online, but you can use like a variety of different sheets. So getting yourself familiarized with some of this vocabulary can help you with your transition sort of like words, so that when you're transitioning between some of these ideas, it's a little bit less choppy. It's a little more sort of flowy, right? Free flowing. So yeah, that's definitely definitely a good resource in the short term. So now we have to discuss your grammar, right? Your conventions, which include spelling, capitalization, paragraphing, punctuation, and grammar usage, right? And sentence length varied. Your sort of paragraph spacing and your grammar is kind of a little bit all over the place. It's kind of an issue that is, throughout your essay, um, but that's okay because you're still developing your English skills. And I have to give you a score of 1 because it could be a little bit difficult to decipher some of the meaning you're trying to convey, especially in the last paragraph. Like in this sentence, it was a little bit difficult to decipher the meaning, but I believe you're making a call to action and addressing the government in this. At least that's definitely my interpretation, but I believe that someone else can have sort of derived a different interpretation, just because the grammar is a bit off. But yeah, now when it comes to an argumentative essay like this, I definitely like to focus on the content of the argument, which you're pretty good at doing, right? Pretty good at delivering an argument, giving a lot of reasons for it. I can tell you have a lot of passion for this topic, and you display a wide array of evidence here. We still definitely want to develop your grammar skills because good grammar will help you better convey your message to other people. Because your skills are still developing, I think there's a couple of approaches we can take. I've seen other teachers try this approach where they allow students to rate their preferred language, right? So like essays in the student's preferred language. Yo puedo hablar español y si escribes en español, pues te voy a entender. También puedo ayudarte a traducir. I'm going to break the fourth wall a little bit here, Professor. I hope you can speak Spanish. I was just saying that I could help the student translate if they write in Spanish. Now, if you speak a different language other than Spanish as your main language, then we can still run the work through online translators and you can still write in your preferred language. Online translators are not always reliable, but the technology gets better as time progresses, and I have a lot of multilingual friends who may be willing to help me translate papers from time to time. I want to hone in on the skills you already have and give me the best work, since I know you're fully capable of writing good work. As for developing your English grammar skills, I think that goes hand in hand with the next and final point on the rubric, which we will discuss now, right? So the next and final point is word choice. Looking at what you've written, here a lot of your words are very specific, very direct. You give examples here for what you want people to do, right? You believe that people should, hold on, let me see. We can pressure the government by making protests or sending letters. This is a very specific word choice, right? Let's see what else. I think the use of the word yanks in the intro is a little bit questionable for the reasons I mentioned earlier, but I think it's definitely an interesting word choice. A little bit unprofessional, some might think, right? But your words are definitely varied, and they carried a lot of weight. I think I'm going to give you a score of 3 because your word choice is overall really good, but I think there's room for growth. And that's something that would come with better grammar as well, since grammar and vocabulary come hand in hand as you continue to master the English language. And now the best way to master that language is to immerse yourself in it. One of the best ways to do that is by reading works from your classmates. Doing this could expose you to grammar and vocabulary that is appropriate for people in your age group and, relevant to the people that are around you, to the people that are in your community and that are, your age. So you will be exposed to the word choice of your peers, and you can see how they structure their sentences. So you could even use your classmates' work as models for future writing. And anyways, overall, I can tell you're a very passionate writer. Your arguments carry a lot of emotional weight. There's definitely a lot of room for growth as well. I believe that if you follow some of the tips I've provided, your writing could become an unstoppable force. I really see the potential in you. You can feel free to take this rubric here um, as a guide to help you craft your future argumentative essays. This document can come in handy, certainly. Um, but yeah, thank you for listening. I'm signing off for now, and I'm looking forward to working with you and seeing your future works. Have a great day.